Okay, so we are going to be doing Monet today. Um, you know, when I thought about this, I put him off a couple of times because Monet is so overexposed. And I thought, this is going to be hard to find something to say about this guy. In the process of putting this together, I was really overwhelmed by his genius, and yeah, there's plenty to say about the guy. There's there, as far as I know, the number of pieces that he did in his lifetime that survived his practice of burning anything that he didn't believe was up to snuff was the number was somewhere around 1964 or something like that. I've heard a couple of different numbers from different people. Um, so there's a lot of paintings that he produced in his lifetime. Um, Putting together this presentation was quite a chore as far as editing down and getting to what I really wanted to pinpoint and bring out. Um, the show up in Boston is down on the 28th, so there's like one more week to go on this. If you're up in Boston or if you're headed that way, it would be great. But we have MoMA, which has a really fine collection, and that big panoramic piece of the water lilies. The Met has a really fabulous collection of them, and they always have those a good group of them up. The Guggenheim has some really fine ones. Even the Frick has a piece. Since they are open again in the Breuer building, you would be able to see that at the old Whitney. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover several series after I do the initial introduction to his work. Um, and basically that's going to consist of the Seacoast, the Haystacks, Poplars, the Rouen Cathedral, and of course the garden and water lilies. There was also a series that he did when he was in London, and those are quite fabulous too. But they don't have any of those in the collection in Boston. They've got 35 paintings up there, and I sort of kept it to things like what they had there. That's just kind of how I played this. So, Impression Sunrise. This piece is a disclaimer. Basically, they say that Impressionism was kind of coined after this painting. In fact, impression was something that was used quite a lot when people were doing larger scale pieces. They would do sketches and they'd call them impressions. So when they were putting together one of the Impressionist shows, he was talking with Sisley, who was another Impressionist painter, and Sisley asked. I mean, basically, Monet said, "I've got this piece. I don't know what to call it." And Sisley said, "Well, why don't you call it Impression Sunrise?" So that's where the name of that came from. If you look at this painting, there's some really fabulous things about it. There's that orange sun against that blue gray sky is really, it's the contrast. It's the complementary colors playing off of each other. The blue against the orange makes that thing pop out. The tendency would be to paint the sun as the brightest thing in the whole painting. The way he managed to do this is by using those subtle complementary colors to make it stand out. Very beautiful piece. Small, not big, 19 by 25. And here's the man himself. Um, on the right is a portrait by Renoir of Monet. They were lifelong friends. I'll go more into that. On the left is Monet. Now, he had a lot of losses in his life. You see him with the black armband. His second wife died in 1911, and as far as his first wife is concerned, I'll talk about her later too. So we're going to move along. It doesn't hurt to say that Monet was a rather depressive fellow. In fact, we look at these beautiful light-filled paintings and think, oh, wow, the guy must have been just so cheerful. He was depressive, he was obsessive, he was frustrated constantly. He was trying to capture something that he felt like was beyond his grasp at all times. So it's an interesting play. If these beautiful paintings had voices, they'd be screaming with the frustration that was behind the artist. But there's another element to it, which I will also get to, which has to do with the balance, with this great beauty that he brought into the world, and there's a certain level of bringing light into a depressive life. So we'll talk more about that. These two caricatures were made by Monet. He sold a lot of those things. It's how he ended up being able to afford to go to art school. He was a young student. Did these in Le Havre, where he lived, and sold a lot of them. He was very good draftsman.
Larry,
yes.
Before you go on, somebody
Sure.
said that Impression Sunrise is displayed in the Museum Monet,
Marmottan. Yeah.
Marmottan in
Yeah.
Paris.
Yes.
So
I know.
maybe people be interested. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So his caricatures were displayed in a local frame shop, and a wonderful painter by the name of Eugene Boudin saw the work and asked the framer, whose pieces are these? They're really fabulous. And the guy said, well, it's a young man, and his name is Oscar Monet, which actually Oscar Claude Monet was his name, and he signed all of his caricatures O Monet. And Boudin asked to be introduced to him, and they met, and he felt that Monet was very talented. Boudin bought him a set of paints and said, come paint with me outdoors and try this. Have you ever tried painting? He said, no. So come try. And so basically that was his first experience with painting with Boudin. And Boudin was very much into painting outdoors. He was a plein air painter. So that was the beginning of Monet's painting career. Monet's father was a grocer, and he really did want Monet to follow in his footsteps and take over at the grocery store. Monet wasn't really that interested. So Boudin actually went and talked with the father and convinced him that his son was really talented, and that he should actually have him go to Paris to study, which Monet did. And in Paris, he met Renoir and Sisley when they went to study in a salon with a teacher. I can't remember his name now. It's not that important. But Renoir and Monet and Sisley all talked about painting and talked about this business about brushwork and how to capture light, and they talked about a new way of painting, and they went out and painted together, Monet and Renoir. They became friends studying in Paris, as I said here, painted together as young artists. These sketchy pieces from 1869 are examples of one of their trips to the countryside. You can see already the focus of each artist's interest in these paintings, the shimmering light on the water and the composition for Monet and the interaction of people for Renoir. The Monet is at the Met, so you can get to see it there. Okay, so this is you know, one of the suburbs of Paris, and Monet was out there, you know, painting in the snow. Now, he would not do, unlike the belief that everything was painted on site. It's not true. Monet would paint these, he would do these sketches outdoors. He would also rework them in the studio. There are layers and layers of paint on this thing. If you look at how thick the impasto, the thick paint, is in the whites of the snow, there's a lot going on there. That's really thick paint. It doesn't happen all at once. This painting is a really interesting piece. The perspectival business in the fence, leading you into that distance, is very strong. He used these slashing strokes to create it, but you know, there's the way he's catching the snow on the top edge. The struggle of the people coming up the hill. You know, you can see that the wind is blowing into those umbrellas, and they're kind of struggling their way along. The use of color in this piece is really spectacular. This green that's in the fence, playing off against this kind of maroon, red in the trees and in the brush. It's muted complementary colors. Again, you know, the green tends to recede, the red tends to come forward, but this perspectival business brings that fence at us. So there's this intrinsic conflict between those things, and makes the painting really interesting. If you look in the shutters on the house on the right, it's this really cool green over there. And if you look back in those trees in the background, it's this beautiful gray blue. And then there's the sun trying to work its way through that sky. Moving on. Okay, so this is Renoir's wife. Camille was his model before she was his wife. They met in the early 70s, 1870s. The piece on the left was something which Monet painted to try and get into the salon. I've talked about the salon before. That was really the major place where artists got their work seen and sold. Their reputations were made there. This piece did get into the salon, but it was criticized harshly for the placement of the samurai on the dress, and where the head lands on her body was something of a to-do at the time. What can I tell you? On the right is Camille, and that's their son. And she sat for him many times. This is something which was an ongoing theme in this section of his work. Now, Camille died young. She didn't do well with the circumstances that they were living in. Now, Monet was not making a heck of a lot of money. He was barely getting by. He had one or two collectors, and it was rough. He was constantly writing letters to friends, to other painters. He was friends with a guy by the name of Caillebotte, who was another Impressionist painter. Wonderful painter. Caillebotte was wealthy, so Monet would ask him occasionally for money. In I believe it was 1870, the Franco-Prussian War was happening, and they were nervous in Le Havre, which is where they were living, and so the Monet family went to England. In England, basically, he painted a whole series of paintings, which are really wonderful pieces too. I don't have any examples of them right now, but he met Durand Rual, who is an art dealer, who was a French art dealer, who was setting up a gallery in London, and they struck up a friendship. Durand Rual was fostering the Impressionists. He really was showing and trying to sell their work, which was a rather hard sell. There wasn't a heck of a lot that was selling in France during the Franco-Prussian War. So that friendship and that partnership went on for the rest of Monet's life. Durand Rual supported him. He gave him what he could as far as money is concerned. So it was a hard life. It wasn't until Monet was about 45 that his work started to sell well. So these two pieces are interesting pieces. They're the Poplars on the left. This is a more traditional landscape composition with the trees pushed off to the left, and this vast expanse, and the layering of the fields off into the distance, and your standard horizon line there. The piece on the right is heavily influenced by the Japanese prints that Monet so admired. This kind of asymmetry of this tree kind of struggling at the coastline, and that kind of gnarled quality to it, and the fact that it's taking up kind of the center of this composition. He's kind of done away with that horizon line in the mist. So it's an interesting, transition for Monet. Again, these coastal pieces began to sell very well. By 1888, he had a show um, at Duran Ruel's gallery. Now, you know, Camille passed. She died of TB in 1879, so she never saw any of his success, which is really was really sad for Monet. He had two children with Camille, and he and Camille actually stayed at one of his patrons' houses because he had no money. This fellow's name was let me see if I can find it here. His name was Ernest Hoshadai. He was a department store owner, and he and his wife had a place in the country and invited Monet and the family to stay there while Camille was sick. And so this was very precious and really important. Now, what ends up happening is Camille dies in 1879, and it seems that Eugene Hoshadek has an affair with the woman, ends up moving into Paris and staying there, and his wife Alice stays in the house with her 6 children and Monet's 2 children, and of course over time Monet and she strike up a relationship, and she eventually becomes his second wife. Interesting little tidbit, nice and juicy. Anyway, it's a kind of an interesting transition. So what I'm going to do now is move on to, these pieces sold like hotcakes. These pieces were really, they were appealing to people. This is a vacation spot where a lot of Parisians went, and they're really beautifully painted. I mean, the business of the brushwork, the broken mark, the drag of the paint, it's really called scumbling in painting. Basically, when you drag paint over another layer of dried paint, it kind of drags and breaks. The mark breaks up, and you can see it especially in the water and in the stone in these things. Let me see if I can do a zoom in for you, and it's kind of a blurry shot, but you can see in the stone, and let's see, down here in the water, you can see how the brushwork is broken up, and that's scumbling, that technique. The other thing is thick paint is called an impasto, and impastos draw your attention. So let's see.
Larry, did he only use oil?
Yes, in these he did do pastels, very few watercolors. He did do really beautiful pastels, but everything I've got on here is oil. He had a very, very sound oil painting technique. They have held up very, very well. Many of these paintings are over 100 years old at this point. There's very little cracking. Unlike somebody like Van Gogh, who was painting very heavy impastos, very thick paint all at once. This technique of scumbling really allowed the paint to dry and gave a really firm structure for the paint to adhere. So,
do you know how large these paintings are?
They're not very large. They are manageable sizes for apartments in Paris. He was a very smart painter at this point. Uh, and also, if you're going to go out and paint plein air at this stage of the game, unless you're wealthy enough to have a bunch of assistants carrying giant canvases out there with you, and standing around holding them in place while the wind blew them around, you're going to tend to want to paint small. So they're manageable sizes. They're, you know, not bigger than 30 by 40. Most of them are, you know, 18 by 24, 30 by 30, that kind of thing. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Haystacks. And this is something of a real piece of genius coming out. He did 20 of these that survived. His vision and range of color, there is some speculation. See, let's see. The rods and cones in your eyes absorb the color. They send the message to the brain. There are some people that believe that there's hardwiring that's different for some people, and this guy had such a subtle range of color, such a ability to perceive things that are there but barely visible to most of us. And there's also the fact that the spectrum range that some people have is much wider. For some people, actually, women have a wider spectral range than men for the most part, and some extraordinary people can see into the ultraviolet spectrum. I am a true believer that Monet was seeing things, and they weren't just inside his brain. He was able to perceive these nuances that many of us don't see. I see it in him, that's for sure. So these gorgeous pieces, these glorious pieces. They call them haystacks. They actually were grain stacks. It was wheat that was mounded there until the thrashers came by. So this would stay there for a whole season. They'd stay into the winter, which you see down in the lower left-hand corner. That's a winter scene with the haystacks. So, and here is a close-up. And I am going to zoom in because you're going to see all the stuff that I'm talking about with the scumbling. Look at that brushwork. Look at how that brush skips over those marks that are underneath it. And you know, he didn't do this in one shot. This is not something that was just painted plein air in one shot, in one deal. Unlike Van Gogh, who would paint 2 paintings in a day, this guy would paint 2 paintings or 3 or 4 paintings in a day, but he would change them off because the light effects were changing constantly. So he would work on 4 or 5 paintings at a time during particular times of day when particular kinds of phenomena were happening. And we're going to go into more of that when I move on to the next series. And that is, well, the Poplars. And these, you can see this kind of shimmering motion in them. He had the ability to capture that sense of breeze going through these shimmering leaves and just portray that in a way that when you're in the presence of these paintings, you can feel them. You can actually feel them move. There's that sense of vitality in them. Now, this is a very frustrating state. The sun is constantly changing. The wind is different on different days. How do you capture this? And yes, he worked out there in nature, and yes, he also took them back to the studio and worked them up further. You know, there's a mythology about Monet that he is this plein air painter, and that's what he did. And it was a myth that he promulgated. He loved that idea, and it was part of like his whole thing. But it's really salesmanship. So here's a close-up of one of these pieces, and I'm gonna pop on the zoom so we can go in and see this a little bit closer. And again, you can see how that brushwork, the layering, sometimes there's as many as 6 layers of paint in these pieces. And you can see what's going on in those leaves up there. The directionality of the brushwork, the play of lights and darks, you know, the warm and cool business happening. It's all, you know, this is a brilliant painter. All right, now we're moving on to Rouen Cathedral. And this is one of those places where you really can see how the changing time of day would alter just so radically what he was seeing. He rented a little apartment when he was doing the series across the street from the cathedral so that he could paint in different weather situations. And basically he was working, you know, he would work on 6 or 8 canvases in a day. And sometimes the painting would only, the phenomena that he was seeing would only be there for 15 or 20 minutes. And so he'd paint that painting in that particular moment and then move on to the next. And you can see well, I'm gonna zoom in on this one too. What the heck? The texture in this, it's almost like stucco. You know, there's a quality to this thing that just beautiful paint. A little too blurry for me. All right, so excuse me. Here's the model. So you can see the complexity of this thing and how he abstracted off of it, used it as a model, but not as a chain. He was not trying to capture the realist aspect of this architecture. He was trying to capture the feel, the way the light moved on it, the way it changed during the day. You can see how warm the one on the photograph on the right is, as opposed to the coolness of the one on the left. And they're just really different times of day, and how that was playing off of the building. And here are 3 more spectacular pieces. You know, sunset, sunrise. You know, atmosphere is different. You know, it's a misty day. It's a crisp, clear autumn day. It's, you know, all these factors came into play working with this. He really was sensitive to all of that and trying to capture that in his paintings, and was frustrated as hell. Okay, and now we're moving into Giverny. Um, so they actually rented a house in Giverny. Um, in the whole, they moved the whole family, the 8 children and the adults into a house that they rented. Um, and eventually, when um, better times came, he bought the house and gardens. Um, I believe it was 1890, and he married Alice Hoshaday in 1892, 2 years after they moved in there. So they had been living in sin. um, so these are pieces that come out of. Now I haven't talked much about people who influenced Monet and people who he influenced, because there are so many that it would be a whole other hour to talk about it. The Impressionists, Manet was a very powerful influence on Monet in his early phases of painting. But he also went to London. He saw Turner. You see the atmospheric quality of Turner in these paintings. Um, the people that Monet in turn influenced throughout the world is remarkable, especially in the United States. He was the American Impressionists came and stayed in Giverny and studied his work and studied with him. He had a very profound effect on that. His work was selling. Durand Ruel had a gallery in Manhattan and I believe one in Boston. I'm not 100% certain about that part. I know he did sell through Boston. So there was a broad market for Monet's work in America.
I just want to mention, if you have a question, please type it into chat.
Yeah. Thank you, Joan. Okay, so 1908, what was going on in the avant-garde? Basically, Picasso is the top piece, very, very solid cubist form. They were really looking at Cézanne as the father to look to. Matisse on the bottom, again, looking to Cézanne for their cues. Not basically this piece by Monet, the Grand Canal, Venice. He went there, painted these beautiful paintings, and the avant-garde was not looking to Monet at that time. These pieces they sold very well. They were very accepted, and that was not where these guys were at that time. And it didn't get much better in the 20s and 30s, when surrealism and a lot of the crazy expressionist stuff was going on. They kind of didn't see what Monet was up to, but we do now. The garden developed very, very profoundly over time. He bought more property adjoining the cottage at Giverny and expanded the garden out. Apart from painting and gardening, I'm good for nothing. My greatest masterpiece is my garden. So as he was more successful, he hired gardeners to work along with him. He had a crew of gardeners. At some point there were 4 to 6 gardeners that he had. He had a love for his garden and a love for fast cars. And he didn't drive. He had his chauffeur drive him. He also was quite the dapper dude. He would dress like, basically an English gentleman. You can see it in some of the shots of him. I don't know if I've got any more that I threw in there, but it's definitely, that was an aspect of this guy. So he loved his flowers. He loved food, loved to eat. He was a gourmet. Okay, so this is a map of Giverny, of the gardens, of the plantings, of the layout of the water garden. The water lily pond was something that expanded over time. In 1911, Alice died, his second wife, and this was a profoundly disruptive thing for Monet. He was devastated by it. He didn't paint for, I believe it was a year. I'm not 100% sure about how long the length of time was, but he was very depressed and very, very lonely. This is, we're talking about 1911, and then 1914. One of his sons was in the army, died in World War I. 1914. This was devastating to him. He just felt at a total loss. Now, during the 1880s, he had become friends with Georges Clemenceau. Georges Clemenceau was actually, let me see if I've got the dates right here, was the prime minister of France. And he was prime minister of France twice, actually. He was prime minister in the early 1900s, and then again from 1917 to 1920. And Clemenceau was friends with Monet for 40 years. He was a supporter. He was a client, and he used to call Monet that grumpy old man. And he would come out and he would basically cajole, persuade Monet to paint. And what he did was persuade him to keep going at this point. His eyesight was failing to some degree. He had cataracts developing, and you can see the vibrance and intensity of this painting. Some people say it's because of the cataracts, because of the coloration and all that. I don't buy it. I think he was changing. This was part of the rage of this old guy. And this painting was painted from 1918 to 1924. Over that period of time, the guy was in his late 70s, early 80s. This is quite a painting. And this is the Arch Rose Garden over here. This is a photograph of Giverny as it is now. It actually fell into rack and ruin in the 70s and 80s. The property was given to the French state by his son. His son died in a car accident in the 60s, I believe it was. Anyway, he turned the property over to the state, and they were not doing anything with it. So everything was overgrown. But this is the garden, and this is this is the Japanese footbridge. I'm sure you've all seen it in some form or other. And these are the pieces that he was working on in this period of time in the late 20s. They look fabulous. They're these abstract paintings, the brushwork, the feel of it, the vibrance and vitality that is in these pieces. They're just vibrating with life. Okay. Here's more. You can see the footbridge and how that was painted. Now, Clemenceau saw what he was working on with these lily gardens, and he said, "I have a project for you. I want you to paint them, and I want you to donate them to the state." Okay, from the Japanese bridge in his water garden, Monet obtained a high viewpoint of the water and a correspondingly steep picture plane, and uninterrupted by a shoreline. This reflective surface of the pond with its floating vegetation seems transformed into a limitless space. In 1908, he wrote, "These landscapes of water and reflection have become an obsession, yet I want to succeed in rendering what I perceive." And as he said, basically that horizon line has vanished from these pieces. They are truly abstract. This wisteria painted against the sky, no horizon line, just this beautiful, tenuous marking. They're very peaceful. One of the things that I would contend is he didn't have Prozac, but he did have these paintings to work with. And this painting on the left looks like a sketch, but he signed it. And the man didn't sign anything that he didn't feel was finished. He burnt them if they weren't finished. He burnt them if he wasn't satisfied with them. So this piece, with these bare areas of canvas still showing through in areas he felt was complete enough to sign. Now you can see the water lilies on the photographs of the water lilies on the right. And then below, I pulled out some brushwork for you to see that turbulent, wonderful surface that he was painting on. It's a fairly decent sized painting, 60 by 78. It got bigger. The beauty of these things, this vibrant, loose freedom that he's allowing himself. There's a serenity in it and a vibrance. It's meditative, yet it's energized. Okay, so these pieces are just spectacular. And it is no wonder that when these came to the United States in the 50s, the abstract expressionists looked at them and said, "Oh my God, where has he been all our lives?" This piece, again, the willows. These pieces were painted after World War I. They are in many ways about the grief and loss that took place in the war, and the grief and loss of this old man who had lost two loving wives and a son. Um,
And Larry, I just want to say, one person said that those Footbridge paintings can be
yes,
seen in the Princeton Art Museum in Jersey.
yes, and there's also they have them at the Museum of Modern Art, and they have one, I believe, at the Guggenheim. I'm not sure if they have one at the Met. I can't remember that, but I think they do, actually. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And all these paintings, they're not all in the Boston exhibition.
No,
No.
not at all.
That's
No,
spread out.
no.
Mhm.
Many of them are from Montmartre, from the big ones that we're coming to are Orangerie. Um, they do have one of the pieces that's coming up. That's one of the big water lily pieces. Okay, so here on the right is a photograph of the water lilies in the pond, and on on the right you see the brushwork. You see all that, and you see how he is emulating, imitating, using the source as an inspiration for the painting. And he would have the gardeners carry these things out into the garden, and he'd paint on them for a period of time, and then take them back into the studio and paint on them more there, and bring them back out when he needed them to be refreshed from the direct observation. But they were not dependent on that external experience. They really were coming from inside. Golden light, just spectacular. His range of color throughout these pieces. And this should be a very familiar piece to some of you. It's reflections of clouds on the water lily pond. This is at the Museum of Modern Art. Notice the dates on it. Started in 1914, the loss of his son. Ended 1926, when Monet died. He would not let this out of his studio in his lifetime. He continued to paint on these paintings. In fact, all the paintings that are in the Orangerie were also in his studio. He built a studio especially for it. Gigantic studio space. And the Orangerie, this 360-degree view of the garden, of the water lilies. It's really, this was Clemenceau who set this up, and Monet didn't live to see this installed. It was installed in 1927, the year after he died, and the reception at the time was lukewarm, which is hard to believe. This is, it's a spectacular installation piece. The piece on the bottom gives you a sense of the real color. These look very dark because they're under natural light in the Orangerie. But really, the piece on the bottom, I pulled out so that you could see what sort of more what the color was about and what the arrangement was. There's a whole bunch of spectacular, very abstracted pieces that I didn't cover in this, but they are beautiful. Those underpaintings, and he signed a lot of them, so he felt that they were finished. He was headed in a very interesting direction at 86 years old. So this is our Monet. And that's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you. People were commenting how wonderful it was all during the presentation, so it's interesting. So that you gave us a nice selection of places to go visit them, so thank you.
Yes.
And I just want to mention that somebody asked how to register for the programs. You just go to our website, which is chappaqua.library.org, and look for the program, and then they'll give you a link. And it's just the same way you did this program. You register, and you'll get a link. So,
and all the programs are archived.
yes, all of
when
our
you go to
programs.
the home page and you scroll down on the right-hand
Right.
side, there's a link
Yeah,
that you can tune in.
yeah, you could see all. Well, I should put myself on screen. You could see all the archived videos that we have. You just scroll down on your right, you'll see a screen. Under the screen, there are 3 links. You look for library programs and lectures, and then you'll see it, and you can see it as often as you want. So
Right.
it's really very nice. And we have lots of programs there, so I hope you go. Okay, thank you all for coming. We won't see you next week, but we will the week after. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So there's lots more. I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay.
We'll see.
Well, we can
It was
talk on the phone.
interesting. It was the first time you got thank yous during the program.
Okay.
It was beautiful. I wish I could go to some of these places, right?
There are a bunch of programs. There's a spectacular set of lectures on these things. I didn't have enough time to get them because I was just struggling to try and reduce down and contain everything that I wanted to say about the guy.
Okay, so we got some of them.
Yep.
Oh, did he use chalk or oil? Yeah, this person asked before. Yeah, he mentioned this before. He used oil.
He did do pastels, but they were very small in comparison to these pieces that we're looking at now.
Yeah.
And he used them just as sketches, just to take back to the studio and work from. But they were beautiful.
Now, Larry, I'm just going to end the meeting, and I'll see you Monday, right?
Yes.
Oh, wait, I meant oil type or chalk type pastels.
They were chalk pastels. They weren't making oil pastels back then.
Okay. All right, I'll end the meeting now. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you. Well, I hope we'll see you at the next program. Bye-bye.
Bye.